Where worry and concern once lingered, a beacon shines a light of hope, piercing the darkness and offering optimism in the place of speculation. A long-standing search concludes. The missing return home, and everything is as it was once more. Number 10. On the 12th of February, 1995, Alec Jaden Fishman was born into a small, close-knit family. He would be raised in Henderson, Nevada, and remained close with his family even in adulthood. Not much else is known about Alec's background, with the next part of his life story resuming in late 2023, a time when his loving family, especially his mother, Tammy Haskett Anderson, would become his fierce advocate when he mysteriously disappeared. 28-year-old Alec told his parents that he'd be heading to Denver, Colorado to visit some friends before making his way to San Francisco, California to catch up with a former girlfriend. He'd be visiting her for about 3 weeks. On the 27th of September, he boarded a flight from Las Vegas, Nevada to Denver, where he had a 10-hour layover. Finally, he'd be able to board the next flight, which would take him to San Francisco. The flow and the plans, though, would come to an abrupt halt when Alec was allegedly asked to leave the aircraft just before it was scheduled to leave. According to airline security, he made another passenger uncomfortable. Instead of boarding a new flight, he would leave the Denver International Airport via Lyft. He would then be tracked to the Econo Lodge Hotel off Interstate 70 in nearby Aurora, Colorado. He checked into this hotel at 2:13 a.m. on the morning of the 28th. Just over 8 hours later, at 10:49 a.m., he checked out of Econo and was seen on surveillance cameras. CCTV captured him leaving the hotel on foot, and from there, his trail runs cold, and none of Alec's family has heard from him since. A few days went by without Tammy hearing from her son, and concern began to grow. A missing person report was subsequently filed with the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, prompting an immediate investigation. Investigators determined that the missing man had last used his cell phone on the day that he checked out of the Econo Lodge Hotel, though it remained active for the next 2 days, after which it was presumed to have run out of battery. Alec's mother noted that in the video, an unidentified man could be seen walking behind him. Police believed he was just another tenant staying at the hotel, and they had no reason to suspect that he was involved in the disappearance. Tammy and her husband Tim would begin working with a nonprofit organization that helped families like theirs conduct searches with the help of canines. The sniffer dogs were taken to the Econo Lodge, and one of them would lead them to a lake nearby. The dog sat at the lake's edge, signaling that she'd picked up the scent. Subsequently, the Denver Fire Department deployed divers into the lake, but found no evidence of Alec or his belongings anywhere in the water. 2 more dogs would lead investigators to the same spot, prompting a second search, which also yielded no results. The team subsequently concluded that Alec must have visited the lake at some point during his stay at the hotel. For almost a month preceding, there were no updates in the case, but Alec's family continued to advocate for him, circulating his story as much as possible, making several appeals for any information that could lead to his whereabouts. They described him as having brown hair and brown eyes. He stood at 5'6" and weighed around 150 pounds at the time. He also had a mustache and a beard, possibly a goatee, when he disappeared. Alec also had several identifying features, including multiple tattoos. Joshua 19 was tattooed on his right forearm, and a ship in a bottle adorned his left ankle. He also had Hebrew lettering across his chest and 2 fish on his left shoulder. He was last spotted wearing a black shirt, a rust-colored hooded sweatshirt, and gray canvas shoes with green shoelaces. He'd also been carrying a green backpack. Oddly, on the 23rd of October, the police were led to Oakland, California, where the cell phone belonging to Alec unexpectedly turned up. This was about 1,230 miles from where he was said to have last been seen. It was through this lead that investigators found something else that was truly alarming. Allegedly, there was a person living in Oakland posing as Alec, requesting money through various apps. The developing investigation was shared on social media, including various missing person pages on Facebook, in the hopes that someone would come forward with information. The case lay dormant for the next 4 months until an unexpected revelation was announced on Tammy's Facebook on the 26th of February, 2024. Alec had been found, and he was safe and well. The family did not reveal any details about where the missing man had been over the last 4 months. What was offered, though, was a heartwarming photograph of family members and the formerly missing Alec Jaden Fishman. Loved ones went on to thank the community for spreading awareness on the case, which ultimately led to his recovery. Without the help of all of you, we may not have been reunited. Awareness is the utmost importance when you are missing a loved one, they were quoted as saying. Number 9. 46-year-old Melanie Ballinger is a resident of Wiley, Texas, who resides on the 100 block of Parkwood Drive. She's married to Daniel Ballinger, and the pair have 2 young daughters together. Melanie was said to have had a heart condition for which she required constant medication. She was also scheduled for heart surgery in November of 2024, a necessary medical procedure that her unexpected disappearance would delay. Wiley Police Department officers were called to the 100 block of Parkwood Drive, where they were met with a panicked Daniel. He explained that late on the 3rd of November, a Sunday, the couple had been settling in for the evening and went to sleep. Melanie lay right next to him in their home that evening, but when Daniel awoke, he found his wife missing from her side of the bed. Her wallet, cell phone, and medication, which are critical for her health, were left on the nightstand. At around 6:35 a.m. that Monday, officers would take the man's statement, and a missing person report was filed. Investigators determined that Melanie was last seen around 10 p.m. the night before, when the couple went to sleep. All of her personal belongings, including her vehicle, were left behind. Law enforcement could only guess as to what had happened next, but whatever it was, Melanie was missing, and she needed to be found urgently. In the first few hours of the search, officers, investigators, canine search units, and the Texas Department of Public Safety helicopters scoured the area. Ground searches and aerial searches were conducted, but no signs of the missing mother could be found. On the 6th of November, 3 days after she was last seen, the police released an update stating that the search was still active and that they're now appealing to the public for any information. Melanie was described as a woman with black hair and brown eyes. At the time, she was 5'7" and weighed about 135 pounds. It wasn't known what she was wearing at the time she left the house. Officers emphasized that she'd last been seen at her home and asked neighbors and residents to check their surveillance cameras, hoping to spot her. A day later, the situation grew even more dire, with the Texas Department of Public Safety issuing a coordinated law enforcement adult rescue alert, also known as a CLEAR alert. By this time, the search radius had expanded over multiple areas, with the authorities relying on tips from the public. Investigators would end up going through hours worth of Ring camera footage as they tried to retrace Melanie's steps. In an effort to bring more awareness to the case, a vigil was held for the missing woman. The word was spread across the entire community, and everyone was now keeping a lookout. It would be this level of awareness that would prove crucial to locating Melanie, or any other missing person. On the 9th of November, nearly a week after she had disappeared, the mother of 2 was found. A resident of Wiley had come across a severely dehydrated woman near Abbey Lane and Tyler Trail. The resident immediately recognized her as the missing woman and promptly contacted the Wiley Police Department. Melanie was quickly transported to a nearby hospital for treatment and has since been reunited with her family. At this time, no further details regarding her week-long disappearance have been made public. The community was just happy that she was safe. Number 8. Pictured here is Mara Minot, a 29-year-old Kalamazoo, Michigan native who's revered as eccentric and regarded as an artist and a local activist. As suggested by her vibrant clothing and the beads and gems that adorn her hair, Mara is a colorful figure, unmistakable and hard to miss. Her artistic abilities did not just offer her a hobby, but a business. She would sell her work around town, often in the form of bracelets and necklaces, similar to the ones she can be seen wearing in this picture. Mara had graduated from Western Michigan University with a Master of Business Administration, an achievement that she was most proud of. Though the exact details have not been disclosed, she did have a close circle of friends with whom she was never out of contact. So when they stopped hearing from her in November of 2025, they became understandably concerned. Months would pass without anyone seeing the woman, prompting a missing person report to be made. Her family members made contact with the Kalamazoo Police Department in the early days of February of this year. According to the released information, Mara was last seen on Portage Street in Kalamazoo, though it wasn't verified as to why she was there. This sighting, though, had been months ago, but no one yet knew that she was a missing person, and subsequent sightings would go undocumented. The woman would vanish with her distinct vehicle, a beige-colored 2005 Mercury Montego bearing the license plate Maramble. She was known to travel throughout the Michigan area selling her artwork. News of the story spread online, alerting the community that the well-known native was missing, prompting many to keep an eye out for her. One figure who knew Mara quite well expressed that they'd seen her almost every night when she stopped in at the truck stop. It's alleged she'd been staying in her car at this time, selling bracelets and necklaces from it. Staff members of the truck stop, though, had not seen her for several months. Though Mara had no direct connections or any reasons to be in Idaho, investigators would be led there after learning that the Idaho law enforcement had contact with Mara in late 2025, allegedly related to an unspecified traffic matter. At this point, police did not suspect foul play, and the search for the artist pressed on. Her family made sure that her posters would not be overshadowed and shared continuous updates on social media. At the time that she was last seen, Mara was said to have been focusing her business on supporting the homeless community, leading investigators to check various encampments, offering a brief description of the woman who stood 5'5", wore bright colors, and had shoulder-length hair. Several days after reporting her missing, a breakthrough was finally made, and it was exactly what everyone had been hoping for. Mara Minot was found safe and well. She was in British Columbia, Canada, for unconfirmed reasons. No further details regarding her discovery have been released. The family has expressed their gratitude to the community, insisting that the missing woman is not in any danger and hasn't been in any danger from the very beginning of the case. Number 7. Lee Soon Seng's story is not a conventional missing person case. In his disappearance, Lee had been captured, released, and started a whole new life, believing that his old one was long gone. It began in 1950, Lee's case, when the Korean War began between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korea. The conflict reached international proportions in June of that year, after North Korea, supplied with the necessary advantages by the Soviet Union, invaded the South. Lee Soon Seng, a South Korean resident, was among the thousands of men thrown into the battle. For the next 3 years, the war raged on, with many soldiers on both sides becoming captives of their enemies or disappearing by other means. It was 1953, just 2 days before the armistice was signed, that Lee would be captured by North Korea, becoming a prisoner of war, a fate that he could have escaped in just 2 short days had they not captured him. Despite the fact that the war was over, many of those who were kept prisoner by either side would remain in custody. Among North Korea's prisoners of war was Lee, who was forced to work in the unsparing coal mines of Aoji. For the 3 years that he remained a captive, Lee slowly began to lose hope of ever returning home and ever returning to his wife. Allegedly, he was even led to believe that his beloved wife was no longer alive. In turn, Kim Yoon-hae also believed her husband had met an unfortunate end, but she held out hope that her soldier, who was missing in action, would one day return. For the next 5 decades, her beloved partner remained absent from South Korea. There were revelations during this period of soldiers who'd been lost coming home and being identified by their family members and friends. Kim's hope was fueled by this, believing that one day it would be Lee. In 2004, that hope would pay off. It was that year in August that Kim picked up her telephone. The call was coming from somewhere in North Korea, and she immediately thought it might be someone trying to scam her for money. She'd been receiving such calls for the past several years by this point, but this time it was different. On the other end of the line, a voice shook her deeply. It was the voice of her long-lost husband. Lee explained that he was still alive, and that he thought she'd been long deceased. It was that same year that a broker, a smuggler who transports people to and from North Korea, got hold of Lee and told him that his wife was in fact alive and that he should get in touch with her for financial reasons. Lee, though, did not care about the money. He wanted his old life back, and so he called her. The long-separated couple arranged to meet, and as they did, neither would even recognize the other. Lee was now approaching his 80s. He was skinny and wobbling as he walked. Kim could only recognize him by his nose and his voice. In contrast, Lee too was shocked to see that his wife was well fed, having been fed the propaganda that South Koreans were starving, which had fueled the belief that she was no longer alive. The pair held each other and cried with joy. For several years, the soldier had been missing, but he was living in North Korea, having been set free, established a new family, and remarried. On the day that he discovered that his first wife was still alive, he gave the fortune he amassed through selling secrets to his second wife, and left to reconnect with his old life, before he became a prisoner of war. The money he left behind was enough to purchase a small house. Lee hadn't spoken of his past after that. "I'm happy now. You're my wife," he expressed to Kim. Number 6. Not much is known about the background of Linda Ward, a woman who lives in Michigan and worked at Art Van. Linda was 44 years old in 2025 and owns 2 husky dogs, Benji and Coco. She was also known to be driving a 2019 silver Ford Escape with the Michigan license plate EQG0213. The last 2 features in her brief description would be present in her 11th of December 2025 disappearance. It was around 8:50 p.m. that evening when Linda was last seen leaving an establishment known as the Whiskey in the Jar Bar, wearing a cream-colored knit coat and a multicolored scarf, an unmistakable element. She was in the company of both Benji and Coco, and was reportedly seen getting into her silver Ford Escape with them before driving off to an unknown location. 3 days would go by, and the family was beginning to grow concerned. They hadn't heard from Linda in several days. On the 14th of December, they would report her missing to the Hamtramck Police Department, which circulated the news. It was suggested that at the time she went missing, she was living in her vehicle. When the descriptions flooded timelines and became public knowledge, tips began raining in. Linda's brother would tell Fox 2 News that his missing sister's dog had been spotted, allegedly in the East Grand Boulevard and Charlevoix areas of Detroit. This information had been supplied to the family on the 15th, 4 days after the woman was last seen. Benji and Coco would later be located safe and unharmed. The investigation continued, but police could find no evidence or motive of foul play. Linda's family circulated her story online through various forums, including Facebook and Instagram, providing pictures, descriptions, tip lines, and any subsequent updates. The missing woman's case would be updated to endangered, with still no clues that would suggest her whereabouts, though they still had no reason to suspect that anything sinister was at play here. Then, seemingly out of the blue, the Hamtramck Police Department released an update. Linda Ward had been located and was found on the 18th of December at 8:30 p.m. The family was notified, and it was announced that the woman and her 2 huskies were safe. Appreciation was extended to the community that provided much-needed assistance throughout the search. No further details have been offered in the case, and the family has requested privacy moving forward. Number 5. Sydney Marquez, a resident of El Paso, held her degree in high regard. She dedicated much of her time to earning her neuroscience degree at Texas A&M, an incredible achievement at just 24. In 2024, Sydney received an unexpected diagnosis. She was suggested to have schizophrenia, a condition that required constant medication. The young woman overcame the hurdle thrown at her and continued to live life to the fullest. On the 11th of December 2025, the gentle, red-haired Hispanic soul would jump in her car and begin the drive from El Paso to Houston, Texas, where she would be visiting friends. She would last be seen that evening in the 9100 block of Bel Air Boulevard in Houston. Surveillance cameras also captured her walking in the vicinity of the hotel where she was staying, while visiting her friends in the area. The video appears to show the missing woman walking across the parking lot in front of the building. After this, there were no further reported sightings of her. Several peculiar aspects of this case have concerned her friends and family. For one, Sydney had left her car running in the 9100 block of Bel Air, leaving her phone inside when she walked away. As far as investigators could tell, it appeared as though she had every intention of heading back to her hotel, and based on the footage, she was within minutes of making it there before she mysteriously disappeared. Adding to the case's strangeness, several other items belonging to Sydney had been left behind. Her iPad was still in the car, along with her class ring and her clothing. Law enforcement could find no explanation as to why she never arrived at the hotel, which was just 150 yards away. other footage investigators were able to track down appeared to show Sydney continued westbound on Harwin Drive. Missing person posters were put up in the area, and flyers were handed out in El Paso as the investigation began to dig deeper. Amid the search for another video, this time taken from the bus stop along South Gesner Road, would spot the missing woman. A whole 5 days after she was last seen. Sydney could be seen in the footage wearing a gray hoodie, gray pants, and tennis shoes. Believing she could have boarded the Metro bus, officers attempted to locate additional camera footage, but the lack of working installations made this effort far more difficult than anticipated. Instead, law enforcement and the family would have to rely on public information and confirmed tips. Several entities involved in the investigation would raise awareness of the case through the media, bringing as much attention to the event as possible and ensuring there were no gaps in coverage. The family also requested compassion and privacy during this difficult time. For several weeks on, the disappearance would linger, with no clues or evidence emerging to work its way into the investigation. On the 2nd of January 2026, though, a breakthrough was announced: the eventual discovery of Sydney Marquez. The young woman was safe and in Houston. At 12:58 that morning, officers responded to a report of a missing person. This came after the caller spotted a woman walking along the roadway who appeared to match Sydney's description. She was found in the 16,000 block of Seattle Street and was identified through a missing person flyer. The young woman was medically evaluated and found to be unharmed with no need for medical attention. Upon her own request, Sydney was released, confirming that she did not require medical attention or further assistance. Her beloved sister shared the news, updating several social media posts. The rest of the family and the police department would confirm the revelation. No further details regarding Sydney's fortunate discovery have been publicized, reinforcing the family's need for privacy. At this point, the community is just relieved that she was found safe and unharmed. Number 4. András Toma was born in December of 1925 in eastern Hungary and later worked as a blacksmith's apprentice. In October of 1944, amid the looming threat of the Second World War, the then 19-year-old Toma was drafted into the Royal Hungarian Army, serving in an artillery regiment. It would be this same year that his life would take a dramatic turn, leaving his family wondering what may have happened to him. The Soviet army would capture the young soldier and immediately take him to a prisoner of war camp with several hundred others. The camp was located a short distance from St. Petersburg, then known as Leningrad. A whole 2 years after the war had ended, the camp finally closed down, and the prisoners who were kept there were distributed across the country, with a handful of them able to return home. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the case for Toma. Due to the stress he endured in the encampment, he was surrendered to a psychiatric facility located in Kotelnish, Russia. Here, he was diagnosed with an outdated term, psychoneurosis, which is used today only by Freudian psychoanalysts. At the time, it was used to describe anxiety disorders, especially conditions where repression of symptoms is involved. Symptoms included exaggerated knee jerks and dermatographia. Because he was diagnosed with this condition, and due to his inability to speak Russian, Toma was forced to remain in the facility, where he would become lost to the Hungarian authorities, who were in search of the missing victims of war. The hospital also failed to keep proper records of its patients, such as Toma being listed as András Tomas. For over half a century, the missing soldier would be forgotten at the hospital, and by the time he was found, he was elderly and only had vague memories of his life before. In 1997, a Slovakian doctor visited the facility and discovered that among all Russian-speaking patients, only one spoke a different language. He identified Tomas's language as Hungarian and planned to have him return to his country. On the 11th of August 2000, the Hungarian authorities transported the man into the country and began the lengthy process of identifying him. More than 80 families would come forward, claiming that Toma was their missing relative, but there were no records that could confirm their claims. The authorities relied solely on Tomas's last memories, which were just enough to lead them in the right direction. In a heartwarming moment, the prisoner of war, who'd been missing for 5 decades, was immediately recognized by his family. After all this time, he was home and now holds the title of the longest POW in history. For the past several decades, Thomas's unpaid military service salary had been accumulating, resulting in a substantial sum upon his return. Number 3. Brooklyn Park, Minnesota resident Jean Mary Bainum was 65 years old in 2025. Not much is known about her personal life, aside from one feature that made her case even more urgent. Jean suffers from unspecified mental health issues for which she requires medication. Without them, she could be at a great risk, and the lack of necessary pharmaceuticals may affect her decision-making abilities. Jean's family hadn't had contact with her for an extended period of time, having last made contact with her on the 23rd of December 2024. When family members got word that she hadn't been seen for several days in early 2025, they immediately grew concerned. Knowing her condition, they were worried that she was without the necessary medical care. Loved ones quickly reported the woman's absence, describing her as at risk, and said finding her was critical. It was soon determined that Jean had last been seen waiting at a bus stop near Zane Avenue North and Oak Grove Parkway on the 15th of January 2025. She appeared to be waiting to board a public transport vehicle and was seen carrying 2 large tote bags. One of the bags, according to a witness, had a red lining. At 4:30 p.m. that day, she would be seen boarding the bus, wearing a long gray coat, gray scarf, hat, and boots. It was determined that Jean, in fact, did not have her medication with her when she disappeared, forcing her case to be treated with the utmost urgency. As investigations into her disappearance were underway, family members got into contact with other resources and began posting the case to social media, spreading as much awareness as possible and keeping Jean's face in the public eye. The Jacob Wetterling Resource Center posted a missing person flyer for Jean on its Facebook page, along with a description of the woman. The post would yield additional sightings of her, including one captured on a Ring doorbell camera. Other reports indicated that Jean was in Rochester sometime in February and was allegedly trying to get to Iowa. In July, she was confirmed to have been spotted at an unspecified shelter in Queens, New York. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension issued an alert out of concern for Jean's well-being. For the next several months, concerns would continue to mount with no fresh sightings or clues that would lead to the missing woman's whereabouts. Given the lack of information, it came as a shock that the BCA would withdraw the alert they had issued and confirm that Jean was no longer a missing person. On the 19th of September 2025, news circulated that she'd been found safe and was in contact with law enforcement. She'd been found at the Champlin, New York Border Patrol on that day. Jean has still not made contact with her family, which isn't out of the ordinary, given that she hadn't spoken to them for quite some time prior to her disappearance. Though they've not heard from her, Jean's status in the system shows that she is safe. The alerts have been lifted, and she's been removed from the endangered missing list. Number 2. 25-year-old Savannah Janae Speaker is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. She stands at 5'2" and weighed 120 pounds. Not much else is known about Savannah's background, aside from her mother's statement that she requires constant medication for unspecified mental health issues. Though it's not unusual for an adult female to go a few days without speaking to their parents, this case was different. The Midland, Michigan resident was in constant contact with her mother. According to her parents, Savannah hadn't shown up for work in a few days and hadn't made contact with relatives or friends, which was a call for concern. A video made by her mother was posted to social media, explaining that the father is her legal guardian during this time, and that she may be in need of medical care. At the time, no one knew who the missing woman could be with or where she was planning to go. She also expressed that a year and a half prior to this incident, the missing woman would have gotten lost, wandering deep into the desert if they didn't have her location. Alarmingly, by the time the family was notified of the disappearance, the location of her cell phone had already been turned off, or it had run out of battery. Savannah allegedly would experience episodes tied to her mental condition, and was described as vulnerable during these moments. She was last seen on the 29th of May, 2025 in Midland, driving her black 2009 Chevy Impala. She allegedly told a friend she wanted to visit North Carolina just before disappearing. The case caught the attention of the Aware Foundation of Virginia, which created a missing person poster in hopes that someone would recognize her. Following the TikTok plea for help, a sighting of Savannah would be reported. The caller claimed to have seen the missing woman driving her Impala around New Mexico on the 4th of June. Another sighting suggested she was in Arkansas on the 5th of June, several days after falling out of contact with loved ones. But the sightings served as a spark of hope and would ultimately come to play a key role in unraveling the mystery. 6 days after this last reported sighting, an unexpected revelation would be made. Savannah Genet Speaker had been located, unharmed and safe. No additional information was brought forward following the 11th of June discovery. The family, overjoyed at the safe return of their beloved relative, has called for privacy as they take the next steps forward in the aftermath of this worrying disappearance. Number 1. Ho Van Thon lived a peaceful life with his family in the hamlet of Tra Kem in Vietnam's Quang Ngai province, in the Tay Tra district. When the Vietnam War descended upon the country, Thon would fight alongside the army. The war began in 1954, a conflict that pitted the communist government of Vietnam and the Viet Cong against the United States. It was a manifestation of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. 3 years before the war ended, Thon's village in Tay Tra would be destroyed. The United States Army had descended upon the region with weapons of mass destruction in 1972. Thon, though, was able to escape the tragedy, and with his son, he ran into the nearby jungle, thinking that his family was no longer alive. The man ran deep into the foliage, fleeing into the hearts of it, where he and his son Lang would never be discovered. For the next 3 years, the two would build a treehouse and live undisturbed in the jungle. When the war eventually came to an end, Thon and his son remained vigilant. Given that they had no contact with the rest of the world, they were uninformed of the conflict's conclusion. They were under the impression that the chaos was still reigning, and were too afraid to emerge. Unbeknownst to the father and son, family members had survived the conflict and had been searching for them for the past 41 years. In 2013, loggers encountered the treehouse-dwelling men and contacted the local authorities. Subsequently, Tri, Thon's other son, would get word of it and go out looking for them. Finally, he found them. Lang recognized his brother and took to him instantly, while a skeptical Thon couldn't fathom the possibility. Eventually, though, he was convinced that the Vietnam War was in fact over, and that they could return to modern civilization. With reluctance, the two emerged, forced from the jungle by Thon's failing health. By the time they were reintegrated into society and reunited with living family members, Lang was 42, and his father was in his early 80s. There were new sounds to the world, new routines, and limited conflict. Modern life was far different from the wilderness that they were used to. Thon and Lang's story was one of survival and commitment, and it served as a testament to perseverance. Tribe had never stopped searching for his father and long-lost brother, a hope that would pay off in the best of ways.